This is Alice Few, and this is our constellation of the week. This week we will be talking about Cassiopeia. So, in the module overview towards the bottom, we always have a constellation each week, and in this module, the constellation is Cassiopeia. So, Cassiopeia, either pronunciation is just fine, but this is one of for those of us in the higher latitudes in the northern hemisphere. So, for us in the Pacific Northwest, Cassiopeia is one of those constellations that is a circumpolar constellation. If you go back and look at the constellation of the week for Ursa Minor, right, the tail at the end of the baby bear is the star Polaris, and that's the star that's closest to kind of our north celestial pole. And so the constellations that go around and around Polaris but never go underneath the horizon are circumpolar constellations. And so Cassiopeia is one of those. And so here is our star map of Cassiopeia, and you get that from either Sky and Telescope magazine or the International Astronomical Union as well. And so you can see again the white part are her boundaries, and the little asterism, the little picture that we use to help us identify this constellation is often nicknamed the Big W. And you can see that right here as you trace out this zigzag of stars right here, but it does make a W. And because she is orbiting or going around Polaris from our point of view, sometimes it's a W when she's towards the 6 o'clock position. When she's over at that 3 o'clock position, it's going to look more like a 3. And when she is up at the 12 o'clock position, it's going to look like an M. And when she comes over to the 9 o'clock position, it's going to look like an E. But anyway, her nickname, we nicknamed that little asterism the Big W. The thing I like about Cassiopeia is it's another way to help us find Polaris. So depending upon where you live, sometimes Ursa Major does go below the horizon. If I head down into Southern California, there's times of the night or times of the year when we're close enough to the equator that all are part of Ursa Major ducks below the horizon. So it sets and then it rises again. And when that happens, you don't have that handy Big Dipper asterism to help you find Polaris. But you always have Cassiopeia to do the same. So we'll look at that in a minute. And then I'm going to show you two deep sky objects that I really like in Cassiopeia as well. Okay, the other thing about Cassiopeia, she's a big part of a huge story, a big mythology in the night sky. And she is the Queen of Ethiopia, incredibly vain, and her daughter is Andromeda. And I'm going to do that story as a completely different little video. But for those of you who have seen either the 1981 version of Clash of the Titans or the fairly new remake, will know Cassiopeia from that story as well. But anyway, so she's part of that story in the sky. All right, so we're going to start by using Stellarium Web to help us find Cassiopeia and look at objects, and then we're also going to use the desktop version so that I can show you some of those deep sky objects. So let's go ahead and go on over to Stellarium Web. All right, so here we have Stellarium Web, and I have it set up for observing over near Mount Rainier, and just any time of night, because as we talked about, she's circumpolar. And so I'm going to just kind of drag the horizon, tip my head up and look a little bit higher in the night sky. And to get my bearings, I'm going to try and make sure that I can find Polaris. That's usually the first thing I do so that I really can confirm that I'm facing north. And so what's going to help me is I'm going to look for the asterism of the Big Dipper right here. So here's the Big Dipper, so that means that all of this, so here is the bear, her back feet, her front feet, her shoulders, her nose, and her tail. And so that is Ursa Major, the Big Bear. And I'm going to use the two front stars of the Dipper, and I'm remembering that I want to go the direction water would fall out. So water falls out this way, follow that line, go about 5 times that distance, and there's Polaris right there. And so I can click on it to test myself. Yep, I found Polaris. Good. and then turn that off. And so to find Cassiopeia, I like to use Polaris and the middle or the handle of the Big Dipper. So instead of using the pointer stars, now that I have Polaris, I like to come back to this handle stars. There's 3 of them here, so the star just before the Dipper, and take that star and draw a line through to Polaris, and then almost the same distance to the other side, I get this cluster of stars right here. And if I look, it's tracing out a W. So let's turn on the constellation lines and see if we're right. Okay, so here's Polaris, Ursa Major, here's that W, and as we zoom in on it, it just needs more space to get the name written out. There's Cassiopeia. All right, so we were able to find the constellation that way. So let's spin this around a little bit and kind of center her up. Turn off the constellation lines again, just so that we can see that W shape. So there's the W shape, here's Polaris. So then when I want to try and find Polaris, for example, and I can't see the Big Dipper, I can't see that asterism, if I trace out this W shape right here, right, and I find the peak of that central star, and I just kind of bisect it, just come right through the middle. That's going to hit me below Polaris, but it gets me really close. And so Polaris, remember, isn't a very bright star, but it is bright enough, and it's by itself. This part of the sky, from most locations, doesn't have a lot of other bright stars in it. So that really helps. So if I just shoot an arrow right through the center of Cassiopeia, that usually puts me right in the handle of Ursa Minor. You can do other things like bisect this line, but so it all depends upon, zoom in here a little bit, and if we're not zooming so well today. Kind of lost control of the computer there for a second. Anyway, there's our big W and there's Cassiopeia. So we'll turn that back on for just a second. So there are several dark sky objects in Cassiopeia, and you can find them on Stellarium Web. So let me show you how to do that. If you turn on the deep sky objects, it's going to show you the big things. So you're not going to see it until you actually zoom in to Cassiopeia. And so as you start to zoom in, objects will start popping up. This little dotted line right here is an open cluster, and that's in Perseus, so we'll talk about that when we talk about Perseus. And then the closer you get, more information starts to pop up. And so you've got this little object right here, but the one I want to show you is an NGC object. And NGC is just the initials for the New Galactic Catalog. And so if I type in NGC 457, that's going to take us to a cluster. Now, this is not a naked eye cluster. This is something you definitely need really good binoculars for, or a small telescope. And it's right here. And it's easy to find if you draw kind of if you take these 2 stars and make a right triangle, then you're just right in the same area. But the fun thing about this particular cluster is it's known by a whole bunch of different names. So out on the east coast of the United States, you'll have observers calling it the Owl Cluster or the Owl and the Mice. If you're in the American Southwest, you'll hear it referred to as the Kachinadal Cluster. Up here in the Pacific Northwest, I hear people talking about or calling it ET from the movie Extraterrestrial. It looks like a little ET. Although I've had a lot of more recent students say that they think it looks more like Wally, so we might just have to rename that nickname again. Okay, so if we zoom into it here, you're going to see that it's this cluster of stars. So there's the 2 bright eyes, and here is the swoop of arms. So the arms are like up above its head, and then its little feet come down here. So it looks like a little stick person. And so you see more and more stars popping out as the web page continues to refresh and add stars. And so that's something that you can expect to see. So let's jump out and show it to you on the Stellarium desktop. All right, so here is Cassiopeia down here. Right, the big W is right there. Here's Ursa Major, the big bear with her tail, and then the bowl of the dipper. So I can take this one star, shoot through Polaris, continue out the other side, and hit Cassiopeia. All right, so we're going to move her up a little bit, and let's zoom in, and let's find that same object. Okay. And it's right here. And so there we have it again, the two bright eyes, the swooping arms, and the stick figure coming out. So it's kind of a fun object to see. It's one of those things where we show people at public night. And they really, really like it, and they get very excited about it because it does really look like either Wally or the play school guy or a Lego man or something like that. It does look like an owl as well if those were big swooping wings. The other NGC item I like in here is NGC 281, and it's called the Pac-Man Nebula, and it's very, very close. So if I'm going to swoop out here for just a second to get our orientation again. So here's the W, doop, 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 and we were just right here, and we're going to jump from this star back to this star, the two bottom points of the W, and do another little right triangle. And we're going to come in here, and it's the nebula is nicknamed the Pac-Man Nebula. And so as I pull in, you can kind of see that, right? Here's the disc of the circle of the Pac-Man, and here's that open mouth, and it kind of looks like it's gobbling up those 4 stars, and there's a little eye right there. So NGC 281 is the Pac-Man Nebula. All right, we'll zoom back out on our Stellarium web, and you know how to use the search bar for that. And so there is Cassiopeia. So she's low in the sky right in the spring. And so give yourself a chance. And if you do go out to look for her, knowing that she's low kind of in these spring months, make sure you have a really nice clear north horizon. All right, so why don't you go ahead and try and go outside and find Cassiopeia on your own.